let's talk about some of these Heisman odds and maybe some good bets that are on the board. It's a bunch of quarterbacks, and it's a bunch of quarterbacks from the SEC. So current Heisman odds, we'll kind of go through some of these. Carson, Beck, and Quinn Ewers are tied for the shortest odds to win the Heisman at plus 750. Then you got Dillon, Gabriel and Will Howard. So you got Dillon Gabriel, obviously transferred over to Oregon from Oklahoma this past season. He's at plus 1,000. Ohio State quarterback transfer Will Howard plus 1,000 as well. And then you got Jalen Milroe at Bama plus 1,200. Nico Iamaleava. I'm going to get that right by the end of this season, I'm pretty sure. Plus 1,500. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, plus 1,800. Jaxson Dart, Ole Miss, plus 1,800. Connor Weigman, plus 2,000. Noah Fifita, plus 2,000. Cam Ward, plus 2,000. And Jaxson Arnold at plus 2,200. Obviously, there's more odds out there for other quarterbacks. This isn't an entire list. And obviously, there's odds out there for running backs and receivers and things like that as well. But looking at these odds, who do you, first of all, who do you think is going to win the Heisman? And then who on this list do you think is a good bet?
I've been pretty adamant about Carson Beck for really the past, well, all of last season, I think for this year of being, a Heisman winner. So last year I was saying that as Carson Beck was kind of getting his feet under him, I said, okay, this is a guy who can win the Heisman next year, right? 2024, if he comes back. He decided to come back. I do think that he's favored for a reason. I think that Quinn Ewers is a terrible bet. I really do. I feel like he hasn't shown much at all in a way of being a Heisman type quarterback. He's not very consistent. He has some big throws, but he's not wowing you with his legs or anything like what Caleb Williams does. Those are typically the guys who win the Heisman. It's either that or you've got to be super polished. If you're a pocket passer, you can't have a ton of mistakes. You're limited to about 5 picks unless you couple those 5 picks with 75 touchdowns, right? Like, if you go, or I shouldn't say 5 picks, if you go above 5 picks, right, you better have like 70 touchdowns. It better be a Joe Burrow type season. So I like Carson Beck though. I think that he's going to win the Heisman. Of this list, I think Jalen Milroe is actually a pretty good bet at plus 1,200. I think that he's a player who does what I just mentioned and has the tools to wow you with his legs and get those extra touchdowns on the ground, make people miss. And then he's got a big arm. He can make the downfield throws. And I think he's going to get better this year. I think having a new coaching staff is going to give him a different perception. As long as he's open to it, he's going to get a new perception on playing the quarterback position. And I think he's always had the tools to do it well. So for me at plus 1,200, I think that those are pretty good odds. But outside of that, I also like Jaxson Arnold. I think that he's an interesting choice down there at the bottom. First full year at Oklahoma. I like the tools that we saw from him last season. And I think that Oklahoma is going to have a better offensive year this year than they did last. So Jaxson Arnold is one that I would consider. But outside of that, I don't think that there's really a safe bet outside of this list. I've got the list pulled up, and one that I can think of that is pretty interesting, at least for a non-quarterback pick, and I don't have odds on him, which is kind of odd. But Quinshon Judkins at Ohio State, I think that Ohio State's going to run the football really well this year, and he's not even listed on the odds for, at least I'm looking at Bet Online right now. I'm sure you could find his odds somewhere, but I think as a non-quarterback Heisman winner, he's probably top of my list. But I'm interested to know kind of what your thoughts are on this. I went a little bit too long on my picks there, but
you're good.
But what are your thoughts on this list? And you got anybody outside of it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Carson Beck is. It, I think barring injury, I think he will be in New York. I
Yeah.
think he will certainly be in New York. He's got the accuracy part, and I think Georgia's going to have a really really good offense this year. So Carson Beck, I feel like is going to be in New York. I think there's a good chance Quinn Ewers will be in New York just because of the fact that I think Texas is going to be a pretty good team. Um, you know, to win a Heisman or be in New York, you can't lose. Your team can't lose more than 3 games. That's pretty much the rule of thumb. We saw that kind of pushed to the brink with Jaden Daniels last year at LSU, and he had an unbelievable season. And they lost 3 games, and he won the Heisman. I think any more than that, you're going to have trouble getting the notoriety and the publicity that you're going to need, because if you're losing 4 out of your 12 games, you're not going to be highly ranked. The matchups are not going to be unless you had already won the Heisman or something like that before. Um, so, with that being said, you're going to have to be on a good team. You're going to have to win a lot of games. So, um, Nico Iamaleava, I think that's a terrible bet because I don't think Tennessee um, this is his first year starting. I just it, give him a chance. I think he'll be higher up on this list, or I should say lower on this list with lower odds next year, as long as things go good, which I think they will. Um, but he's got a lot to learn. I mean, he's essentially going to be a freshman out there because he hasn't played in the SEC consistently at all, and so we're gonna get to see him for the first time. One, for like really good value bet, Mason, I think Connor Weigman is a really good one. At plus 2,000, I mean, look, when this guy went out last year, people forget. I think it was overshadowed just because of the fact that kind of something that I just talked about. Texas A&M was dropping ball games left and right, and it wasn't Connor Wegman's fault. This guy's got a rocket on. It was an unfortunate kind of crazy injury that held him out for the rest of last year, which I think was kind of a blessing because that the Texas A&M situation was just a mess all year. They're basically just trying to get rid of Jimbo all year, and for good reason. For good reason. But I think Connor Wegman is a guy that, if they can get all the tools ironed out, I think he's going to put up some really, really big numbers. I think that's interesting. Cam Ward at Miami is very interesting to me as far as a good value bet. He's going to have good weapons in Miami. The overall talent level continues to rise there. And Cam Ward is a guy that plays with a chip on his shoulder, and there are moments where he definitely has Heisman flashes. There is no doubt about it. If he has inconsistent games, and he played at Washington State, so it's not like he had some kind of amazing cast surrounding him there. I'm interested to see what he'll be able to do at Miami with a much more talented team. I think Carson Beck, like I said, is your best bet here as far as to actually be able to win the thing. Um, I think if you're looking for value, I think Connor Wegman and Cam Ward are a couple of good ones. Um, and as far as Quinshon Judkins, I think that's a pretty good bet. I think he's going to have to split a lot with Travion Henderson coming back. I think he's going to have to. There's no one running back that's going to be able to get the yards. I feel like in today's modern football, to the carries, the yards, and the touchdowns, and then stay healthy all year. I feel like that's such a stretch these days. And I wish they would extend it to where we did the Heisman voting after the season was completely over. I think that would be that would make a lot more sense. We get to see these teams in the playoffs and all that before we do our voting. But Jaxson Arnold, I think, is I like him as a quarterback. I think he needs to really grow as the team's leader this offseason. We're going to talk more about Oklahoma and their season coming up here in just a bit. But he has all the tools in his tool bag. Um, I'm interested to see what they're going to be able to surround him with, what that offensive line is going to look like. That's going to go a long way in deciding how Jaxson Arnold's first year as the full year as the starter is going to go. Um, who else could be on this list that's not a quarterback?
So one that looking at Bet Online that I think is pretty interesting. He had a heck of a year last year, but did battle some injury late. But Ollie Gordon, the second
Mm.
over at Oklahoma State, he's a guy who's got to be on a fun, Heisman pick for you at plus
Yeah.
6,600 odds. Another good one's Luther Burden at Missouri. He's the only wide receiver outside of Travis Hunter that I see here. And then Trevor Etienne for Georgia is actually the player with the I guess you should say the lowest odds to win. The best odds, to win the Heisman, who's not a quarterback at plus 5,000.
Okay.
Running back for Georgia. But kind of going back to your point about Quinshon Judkins, I don't see Georgia just featuring Trevor Etienne to the point where he puts up, I guess it need to be close to 2,000 yards and, putting up 30 touchdowns on the ground. I just don't see it.
Well, and especially for a team like Georgia or Ohio State, whose eye is definitely on the college football playoff, right? And so if you got a running back who runs for 2,000 yards in the regular season, that's great. But once the regular season is over, dude, you're 0-0. It's time to start the season over again now. And it's not just 1 or 2 games anymore. It's more than that. So it could possibly be more than that. So yeah, you're going to have a stable of backs in if you're in the SEC or the Big Ten, you're going to have to have a stable of backs to be able to get through the season. There's no doubt about it. Now in the Big 12, you're right. I think Ollie Gordon. I feel like as far as a non-quarterback, I feel like that's a pretty good. If you had to pick a non-quarterback, position, I would say he would be a good one to pick for sure.